Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. Just 11 days after taking office, President Lee Jae-myung is stepping onto the global stage at the G7 summit, following a rapid series of phone calls with U.S. President Donald Trump, Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba, and Chinese President Xi Jinping. Each of these calls came with symbolism, strategic weight, and diplomatic expectations, marking Korea's re-entry into high-level diplomacy after months of political paralysis. Now, this moment is more than ceremonial. With tariffs looming, trilateral security tested, and U.S China rivalry sharpening, President Lee must show whether his national interest-driven pragmatic diplomacy can translate into trust and traction on the world stage. We ask what these early moves signal, not just about Lee's foreign policy direction, but also about how key powers are reading South Korea's place in a reordering Indo-Pacific. For this, we are joined by Min Jung-hoon, professor at Korea National Diplomatic Academy, here in the studio with us. Welcome, Professor Min.
Yeah, my pleasure always.
And also joining us online is Evans Revere, former acting assistant secretary of state and non-resident senior fellow in the foreign policy program at Brookings. Great to see you.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
So let's begin our discussion right away. Professor Min, the first phone call between Lee Jae-myung, President Lee Jae-myung and President Trump reaffirmed the alliance, but also included some personal exchanges as well. How did you view that phone call overall, I must ask? And also, to what extent does this personal rapport factor into alliance management, especially in this under the Trump administration?
Yeah, and as you mentioned, the new South Korean President Lee Jae-myung and the U.S. President Donald Trump kicked off an effort to build this trust through a phone call Friday, and President Lee had held his first phone conversation with President Trump last Friday, and it was known that they had a phone call on the friendly environment. And during the talks, President Trump congratulated President Lee on his election, and while President Lee pointed out the importance of the ROK-US alliance. And the two leaders converged on the need to work closely together for the development of the alliance. So I'm glad to hear that the leaders agreed to strengthen the alliance between the two countries. In addition, as you mentioned, the two leaders laid a foundation of personal trust when they discussed their experiences with assassination threats on the campaign trail and their shared interest in playing golf. I'm not sure if the President Lee is good at playing golf. Well, I'm not sure. But anyway, they agreed to play a golf together in the near future. And there is a growing expectation that President Lee would first meet President Trump in person on the margins of the G7 summit that would take place in Canada in a week. And President Lee's participation in the G7 meeting will send a signal to the global community that South Korean leadership is back, and South Korea will resume its roles actively on the international stage.
So a lot to look forward to between the two sides moving forward. Now, on the other side, the call, people say that the call came unusually late, which is 2 days later after Lee Jae-myung's inauguration. Mr. Revere, do you think this timing could be read as a concern in terms of diplomatic urgency or alignment as well?
Well, let me begin by offering my own congratulations to President Lee on his victory. And of course, congratulations to the Korean people who have reminded us once again how strong democracy is in the Republic of Korea. But to your question, the call did indeed come a bit later than it normally would, based on precedent. The call was preceded by, I would describe it as an oddly cool White House congratulatory message that made reference to Chinese interference. I haven't heard any serious experts suggest at all that there was any Chinese interference in this election. And indeed, the conservative candidate who lost the election conceded very quickly and very smoothly. The White House initial message itself called the election free and fair. So my view is that this was a rather gratuitous comment by a White House representative, and it seemed to try to associate the White House with some of the accusations about Chinese interference and electoral irregularities that have, by and large, come from the political fringe or from conspiracy theorists. So it's really odd what happened there. But the White House message, the delay in that message in arriving, the lack of a White House readout of the call, the delay in arranging the phone call, of course, all of that suggests that the Trump administration may be trying to keep its distance from the new ROK government for now, and maybe waiting to see what policy moves the new administration is going to take in Seoul. But having said that, it was an important call. It was important that it take place. The readout that we've gotten from the Korean side suggests that it was a very positive call, and that's a good thing. And so let's see where we take things from here.
Mm-hmm. Now, with this, Mr. Reviewer, let's look a little bit more broadly at Yi's diplomatic posture. President Yi has emphasized national interest-driven, pragmatic diplomacy. Do you think this is viewed in Washington as a constructive shift, or is there some unease given, his past criticism of Korea's overly deferential posture towards the U.S.?
Many U.S. observers, including me, quite frankly, have welcomed candidate Lee and now President Lee's emphasis on pragmatism and a more centrist approach on many key issues, including relations with the United States and relations with Japan. And like many other American observers, I certainly hope that this rhetorical shift that we have observed reflects a real shift in the position of both President Lee and his party, mainly because in the past, both he and his party have been associated with some views, including some skepticism towards the United States and the alliance, occasional outbursts of anti-American sentiment from the party, anti-Japanese sentiment, extreme nationalism, and even a troubling occasional flirtation with China. So I think it's fair to say that there is a bit of unease among a number of experts and people in Washington. But there is also, I think, hope that the Democratic Party of Korea and President Lee himself have moved into a new place. And that is, I think, indeed going to be welcomed. I must add, though, in this context, that the nomination by President Lee of a prime minister who was a former student radical who had participated in the occupation of a U.S. cultural and diplomatic facility in downtown Seoul certainly did raise some eyebrows. But I think by and large, most American experts, including people in the U.S. administration, I think are prepared to give President Lee and his team the benefit of the doubt going forward.
Right. As you said, it's still early in the early phases, so we'll really have to see and observe how it goes. Now, let's also shift to the G7 summit. Professor Min, President Yi will debut on the global stage in a few days at the G7 summit with tariff hikes on Korean steel and autos looming. Do you expect any meaningful concessions to emerge from that meeting?
Well, basically, personally, I don't think that the G7 leaders, including President Lee, will actively discuss tariffs and protectionism and possibly form a consensus or reach an agreement about the matters, because the President Trump will also participate in the meetings and possibly lead the conversations. And as you know, U.S. and other European member states, including the Asian member, Japan, have different interests in the trade and the tariff matters. It means that it is more likely that they will just repeat what they want about the matters based on their own national interests, and not likely to narrow the gaps during the meetings. Instead, the leaders want to talk more about the common or the shared matters like the Russian-Ukraine war and the technological cooperation like AI and others. Of course, among the matters like the Russia-Ukraine war, as you know, the U.S. and other European member states also seem to have different interests each other, and it would not be easy to narrow the gaps in terms of how to end the war, like on the Russian side, the Ukraine side, and other kind of cooperations between the U.S. and other European member states. So I don't think that they would reach an agreement easily when they talked about those matters, and it's not sure, it's not certain about if they would be able to issue a joint statement after the summit meeting this time. It would be very tough.
Especially with the Ukraine and Russia war top on the agenda. Now, another key moment expected at the G7 is the Lee Jae-myung Ishiba meeting. Mr. Revere, how important do you think this is in signaling whether trilateral Korea, U.S., Japan cooperation built under the Moon and Yoon previous administration can remain intact under this new leadership?
Well, this is going to be an extremely important meeting. I think it's very good that the two leaders, the Japanese Prime Minister and the Korean President, had a call. That call, by all indications, went extremely well. The Japanese people and the Japanese government and Japanese press have noticed the rhetorical shift that has taken place in President Lee's rhetoric and his party's rhetoric about Japan and bilateral relations. I think the Japanese people and the Japanese government is very hopeful that the Republic of Korea and Japan can continue to develop what is often called a future-oriented relationship, which is, I think, extremely important for them to do. And I think there is a fair bit of optimism in Tokyo that is going to be possible. It goes without saying that trilateral cooperation between and among Japan, the Republic of Korea, and the United States, that has been one of the hallmarks of the last two U.S. administrations, including the current one. And so this is an extremely high priority for the United States and will continue to be a high priority. So if the Korean and Japanese leaders can use their encounter on the margins of the G7 meeting in Alberta, and if they can keep up the momentum that they've obviously established in their initial phone call, I'm cautiously optimistic that going forward we can keep all of the fundamental elements, both of bilateral Seoul-Tokyo relations as well as trilateral relations, including the United States. We can keep that momentum going forward.
Right. That would be very fruitful if that's going to be maintained. Now, Yi has taken this pragmatic line on Japan, as we've been speaking, pursuing this forward-looking ties and also holding firm on historical issues. We have a very special relationship with Japan, of course. Now, his call with Prime Minister Ishiba also emphasized mutual trust and communication as well. Professor Min, how likely do you think this two-track approach to hold up during their expected G7 meeting?
Okay, so let me first elaborate a little bit about what President Lee said during the campaign trail about the South Korean relations with Japan. And President Lee, or the Lee government's pragmatic diplomacy, pursues to cultivate a favorable strategic environment for South Korea in East Asia. To that, based on their strong ROK-US alliance. The ROK-US alliance should be the cornerstone of maintaining the favorable environment, strategic environment for South Korea in this region. And based on the strong ROK-US alliance, the Lee government want to strengthen the trilateral cooperation among South Korea, US, and Japan. And the Lee government also want to advance its bilateral relations with Japan. So basically, I believe that the Lee government want to pursue the continuity in terms of its relations with Japan, based on what happened during the last South Korean presidency. And as you know, this year, the two countries, South Korea and Japan, got the 60th anniversary of the normalization of diplomatic relations, and the Lee government has declared its intention to address like a two-track approach, historical and territorial issues with principles, while promoting future-oriented cooperation in social, cultural, and economic matters and security to build a consistent, stable, and coherent bilateral networks framework in the years ahead. Of course, it's still the rhetoric, but yet I believe that the Lee government would confirm its rhetoric in terms of the policies and the actions in the years ahead. And during the 25 minutes, the conversation, President Lee and the Prime Minister Ishiba reaffirmed the importance of the bilateral ties between the two countries and expressed hope to meet in person at an early stage. So I think that the two leaders will meet in person at the upcoming G7 meeting, and they will just build a personal trust at the meeting and just confirm what they want at the government level and in the years ahead. And they also, during the phone conversations, they also agreed to promote people-to-people exchanges and enhance communication between their government. So we will see the kind of shuttle the diplomacy between the two countries in the years ahead. So I hope that there would be no historical disputes between the two countries. And I believe that the two leaders will focus more on enhancing the cooperation and try to stably manage the sensitive historical and territorial issues in the coming months.
Well, many of us will be looking forward to that. Now, we've mentioned a while ago that President Yi has had phone calls with Prime Minister Shiba and also Chinese President Xi Jinping, but many are pointing out about the order of the calls. It's quite different from the previous liberal Moon Jae-in administration, where Chinese or this time, President Yi spoke first with Japanese Prime Minister, and then he spoke with Chinese President Xi Jinping, which was as opposed to the previous Moon Jae-in administration. What do you make of this sequencing, Professor Min?
Well, of course, it's too early to see the actually confirm what the Lee government actually wants in terms of its relations with the neighbor countries around on the Korean Peninsula. But still, I think that the Lee government pursues as you mentioned, national interest-driven pragmatic diplomacy. And it is grounded in their strong arc-U.S. alliance. And based on the alliance, it pursues the strengthening the trilateral cooperation among the three countries, South Korea, U.S., and Japan. It has got the continuity again, in terms of its relations with the two very important neighboring countries, U.S. and Japan. So there would be a little change in terms of how Lee government cares about its relations with the two important countries. And based on that kind of strong relations with the two countries, Lee government also want to manage favorable relations with China. As you know, China is still important trade partner for South Korea and has been the important player for the security on the Korean Peninsula. But still, the Lee government want to put priority to manage the favorable relations with the U.S. and Japan, and then try to manage its relations with China. It would be new normal of the South Korea, even for the progressive government.
Let's delve deeper into the talk with China, Mr. Revere. During the dialogue, Xi Jinping has emphasized the original spirit of normalization and urged South Korea to defend supply chain multilateralism, seen as a pushback to America's containment. And Yi responded by praising China's leadership and development. In this context, with the G7 preparing strong Indo-Pacific messaging, how do you think South Korea can avoid being boxed into one camp amid deep deepening rivalry between the two big powers?
It's a good question. The camp, if you want to use that word, that the Republic of Korea is in is, of course, one that was dictated by historical necessity. It was dictated by the North Korean invasion in 1950, followed, of course, by China's invasion of the Korean Peninsula, fighting on behalf of its North Korean ally in the hope of achieving North Korea's goal of the violent unification of the Korean Peninsula under North Korean rule. Since then, since the horror of the Korean War, the Republic of Korea has been a close and firm ally and partner of the United States, and nobody knows that better than Beijing, which today is, of course, continuing to try to drive wedges between the United States and the Republic of Korea. It's important, I think, for South Koreans today to remember this history and to keep in mind the importance of the U.S.-ROK alliance and the role that that alliance has played in preserving South Korea's independence, South Korea's sovereignty, and the role that the partnership with the United States has played in contributing to South Korea's own economic and political development. And so I think going forward, it's going to be very important for South Koreans to remember that and to look at the relationship with China in the context of that very problematic history. And I think most Koreans will look at it that way.
All right, Mr. Revere, thank you for your opinion on that. I'm afraid we'll have to conclude our discussion at this point. Thank you so much for your time and for your insights tonight, Professor Min.
Thank you.
And Mr. Revere, we appreciate it so much.
Thank you.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.